Good afternoon. This is the last of 4 Sundays on government, and I've been thinking about the great idea that we shall discuss next. I've been looking here at a list of 102 great ideas. Let's look at them together. There they are, from angel and animal to man, love and man, from matter and mechanics to wisdom and world. We have done government and happiness. I now propose that we deal with an idea that is just as fundamental as they are, as fundamental for every aspect of human life, the idea of labor, the idea of human work. We will start the discussion of labor next Sunday and continue it throughout the remaining Sundays of January. By the way, would you like a copy of this list of the 102 great ideas? If you would, just drop a card to me, care of KGO-TV, and I will send you one. Then perhaps you can send in your suggestion for the next idea you would like to have discussed. Now let's begin this afternoon's discussion of the forms of government and the problem of the ideal of human government. One morning last week, I met a friend who had been following these discussions in government, and he said he had a solution to the problem about the power of government that we discussed last week. He said, as between Jefferson and Hamilton, he had this choice. As far as he was concerned, for himself, he was on Jefferson's side, as little government as possible. But for everybody else, he wanted as much government as they needed. I met him again the next morning. He said he'd been thinking that over. He thought that wasn't really the right solution. That wouldn't satisfy everybody. That the only solution, in his judgment, that would satisfy everybody was theocracy, or the kingdom of God on earth, God governing all men. Then they would all be satisfied. Unfortunately, I don't think theocracy is the solution. For if man was created by God as a rational animal, then I think God would not rule man as a governor or as a prince, for that would put men in the position of children and defeat the development of their rational political nature. That problem, the problem of the best form of government, is one which I think can be solved. In fact, I shall try to indicate the solution this afternoon and show you why my friend's suggestion of theocracy is not the right solution. But the other problem, the problem of how much power government should have, the problem we discussed last week, that's a problem which I don't think can be solved, certainly not in practice, though perhaps in theory. In theory, I think Jefferson is right, that government should carry only some of the burdens of society, and that other organizations should do the rest. Government should do the main job of administering justice. But in practice, I think Lincoln has a point we have to face. Namely, Lincoln said that government must do for men what they cannot or perhaps will not do for themselves. The trouble is, I think, that men use government as a drastic remedy when they fail to prevent certain social ills, and then they complain about the remedy itself. I say that problem probably will never be solved. But this other problem about the forms of government and which is the best government can be solved in both theory and in practice. Let me introduce you to that problem by explaining a phrase that is used throughout the whole history of political theory, the phrase, the forms of government. It always associated with the question, which is the best form of government, or what is the form of ideal government? In fact, this problem has 2 questions in it. One is the descriptive question. How does one government differ in fact from another? The second is the evaluative question. Can governments be ranked, one better than another, and one put at the top of the list as the best of all? Now, there is a traditional answer to these questions. The Greeks first gave us the answer. In fact, you know the expression, the Greeks had a name for it. Well, in this case, the Greeks had all the names for it. Watch now the names I'm going to use. They invented the names for all the forms of government. I said this was the traditional answer. By that I mean it is the answer that has appeared in textbooks and school books generation after generation. And like most answers of this sort, it is oversimplified, it is partly true and partly false. Let me state this answer and show you what the Greeks did, or at least what the school books say the Greeks did, and then let's consider whether it's a good analysis or not. I made a little chart of this at home because I wanted to do this on a small chart that I wanted to compare with the blackboard. Let's look at this chart together. On this chart, we have both answers to the question. Government, by the descriptive criterion, is the number of men who hold power. One man, the few, or the many. And the other criterion is what the government is for, the end or purpose of the government, for the common good of the whole community or for the self-interest of the rulers. And when you use these two criteria together, whether government is by one, few, or many, and the criterion of whether government is for the common good or the self-interest of the rulers, you get, according to the traditional statement, 6 forms of government in 2 columns. Monarchy, the government of one man for the common good, or sometimes it might be called the government of a benevolent despot. Aristocracy, the government of the few, the elite, the best men in the society for the common good. And the third form here, 1, 2, 3, is democracy or polity, which is the government of the middle classes, the predominant middle class for the common good. But when democracy is government by the poor for their own interest, you get a bad form, a perversion of democracy as a good form becomes democracy as a bad form of government. And when the few are not the elite or the best men, but the rich governing in their own interest, you get a form of government called oligarchy, and that's a perversion of aristocracy. And when the one man who is a dictator governs for his own interest, not for the common good, you get tyranny. And so tyranny is the perversion of monarchy, oligarchy is the perversion of aristocracy, and democracy, in the bad sense, is the perversion of democracy or polity in the good sense. Now, according to this chart, these are all good forms of government, and these are all bad forms. But before I go on with this, Lloyd, didn't we have a question on this?
Yes, you're thinking of the question that James J. Barisi sent in. He says, Aristotle said, governments are bad or good according as the common welfare is or is not their aim. Of bad governments, there are 3, tyranny, oligarchy, and extreme democracy. So Mr. Barisi of Cabrillo Street in San Francisco asked, what did Aristotle mean by extreme democracy, and how does this apply to our form of democracy?
That question is right on the diagram we're talking about. It comes right out of it, as a matter of fact. Mr. Barisi, Aristotle meant by extreme democracy not merely the government by the poor in their own interest, the poorer classes in the community, but also mob rule, lawless government by the masses. And he had the feeling that that was a very bad form of government indeed. As a matter of fact, as you look at that point, the distinction between good and bad democracy, you get another distinction that shows what is wrong with this chart. Let's come back to the chart again. For this distinction I just made between bad democracy and good democracy is, as Aristotle and Plato discuss it, not merely a distinction between whether government is for the common good or for the self-interest of the rulers, but whether it is lawful government or lawless government, mob rule. Now, this chart contains 2 serious errors. In the first place, in my judgment, it is wrong to say, as the ancients said, and has been said many times since then in school books, that of the 3 good forms of government, democracy is the least good. And of the bad forms, democracy is the most tolerable and tyranny the worst. That's an error, I think. I shall try to show you. In the second place, I think it is equally an error to say that of the 3 good forms, monarchy, the government of a benevolent despot, is the best. And the trouble with not only is that an error in fact, but if you'll notice these three stars I put here, they indicate that these three forms all have the same amount or the same principle of justice. They're all for the common good. And the only reason why monarchy is ever said to be better than aristocracy and democracy is that it's more efficient. It's more efficient government. But then that doesn't make it better morally. It doesn't make it more just. And we want a classification of the forms of government that shows one good form to be more just than another, not three which are equally just, with one simply more efficient than the others. There's a third error, a third serious error that comes out of this. It is the illusion that the government by the one best or wisest man would be the best government for mankind. That, by the way, is, I think, the error that my friend made when he proposed theocracy, or the government by God on earth. It is an error which John Stuart Mill, in his book on representative government in 1863, described as follows. He says, "It has long been a common saying that if a good despot could be ensured, despotic monarchy would be the best form of government." Mill is right. It's been said for 2,500 years before him. And then he says, and I agree with Mill, "I look upon this as a radical and most pernicious misconception of what good government is." Jefferson, our own Thomas Jefferson, explains what is pernicious and wrong about this misconception of government. Let's go to this plaque here and consider what Jefferson's point is. He explains what's pernicious about it, and the same thing would be wrong with divine government on earth. It would make children of us all. To be governed by the one best or wisest man for our own good would leave us with no voice in our own government, no self-government. We'd live and act as children, not as adults who are exercising our rational and political natures. What Jefferson said, he said in a letter to his aristocratic friend, Dupont de Nemours, in the beginning of the 19th century. He said, "We both consider the people as our children and love them with parental affection, but you love them as infants whom you are afraid to trust without nurses, and I love them as adults whom I freely leave to self-government." And that is the answer. That is the reason why, as Mill points out, the notion of having a benevolent despot or even God rule men on earth is a wrong conception of the best government for men who are rational, political animals. And I say that even though I'm a philosopher, and even though Plato, who was for this kind of government, said that the ideal human society would be one in which philosophers were kings, or kings philosophers. I don't think so. I don't think philosophers should be kings. Now let me see if I can correct the error on that first chart by taking you into another classification of the forms of government that I have put on the blackboard. Let's look at this analysis here, which is an analysis of the forms of government in terms of three distinct principles of justice and giving you a fourfold classification. First, let me call your attention to the basic distinction which the other chart did not make. The basic distinction in the forms of government is between lawless government and lawful government, absolute government or constitutional and limited government. And these two are the most deeply opposed principles of government. Now, this government, this kind of government, lawless government, we also call despotic government, whether it is government by the one or by the few. And this despotic form of government takes two subordinate forms, either tyranny or benevolent despotism, according as the despotic power is used for the good of the ruler, in which case it is tyranny, or is used benevolently for the good of the people ruled, in which case you have benevolent despotism. Notice here how I've used the numbers. Tyranny is 4, meaning it is the lowest or worst of all forms of government. It has no justice whatsoever. Benevolent despotism has only one principle of justice, namely the principle of benevolence, the use of power for the common good, which is the right or just use of power. Now let's take the second principle then. All governments are divided as lawless and lawful or constitutional. And by constitutional governments, we also mean republican government. Now, republican government can also be for the common good, and it can be justly constituted. So it has two principles of justice. It is better than benevolent despotism. But when you talk about when you talk about republican government, you are not only talking about government for the people and of the people, but government by the people. And as soon as you mention government by the people, the question at once arises, who are the people? Does the word people mean the same thing as population? Is the population of a country identical with the people who are its political class? The answer is no. The whole problem now, or when we get to this point in the analysis of the forms of government, is who are the people? And when you say government by the people, do you mean by some of the people or all? And as you answer that question, you get the distinction between two more forms of government, aristocracy or oligarchy. Either term is all right. I think means the same thing finally, which means government by some of the population, or democracy, which means government of the people, for the people, by all. By all. Here you have the principle of universal suffrage, all men being treated equal as citizens. Let me summarize this one other way. What you have here at the top is the government of men as if they were things. Here you have the government of men as if they were children. With republican government, you have the government of men as if they were men, treating them now as adult human beings. And here, men are treated as unequal, and here you have the final principle of justice, men are treated all as equal. So, benevolent despotism has one principle of justice, aristocracy or oligarchy as a form of republican government has two, and democracy is best at having three. Lloyd, don't you think that is a better classification of the forms of government than the other chart we had before?
Dr. Adler, as a political scientist, I think you've made quite a contribution. But I think one of our correspondents would still have difficulty with your new chart. This is Joseph Gatchell. He's from Oakland, and he asks as follows. He says, our form of government is often referred to as this great democracy. I would be inclined to doubt that, says Mr. Gatchell, to doubt that it's a democracy at all. For he was taught that a democracy is a government in which the supreme power is retained by the people, and in which the governed direct what laws shall be passed, and that a republic is a government in which the supreme power resides in those elected by the people.
Yes, this suggestion of Mr. Gatchell's, Lloyd, is one that began with our founding fathers. Hamilton and Tom Paine and Jefferson and Adams all made the distinction between a democracy and a republic. I think they're using the words in a slightly different sense. And I'd like to correct, I think there's a misconception here that has run through the whole of American history. The word republic, as Rousseau points out, and I think the ancients understood, is any form of constitutional government or government by laws. What they wanted to distinguish, Lloyd, what they wanted to distinguish is between two forms of democracy. Let me put them down here, if I may. Two forms of democracy. I'm just going to use symbols. Here I'm going to use the symbol D, and here the symbol R. Direct democracy, where the people directly govern themselves in deliberative assemblies, and representative democracy. Direct and representative democracy. What Mr. Gatchell thinks a republic is a representative democracy, as opposed to what the Greeks had, a direct democracy. And if you ask me, as I think it's fair to ask, of these two forms of democracy, which is better? Is it better to have the kind of direct democracy that the New Englanders had in what they call the town meeting, or the representative democracy that we have in the nation as a whole? That's a good question, and I think there's an answer to it. Direct democracy, in the first place, only fits a very small community. The very small Greek city-states of the ancient world, or our New England towns, where the whole population could meet in a town meeting. But there's a deeper advantage to representative democracy than the fact that it fits the needs of a larger country. Because in representative government, the people can choose the most able men for the offices of government, representative democracy contains, as well as its own fundamental principles of justice, the best features of aristocracy, because it permits the people to choose the best men for public office. Therefore, I say to you, representative democracy, if I put it on the board, has these three principles of justice plus, with a plus value, the plus value of having the aristocratic principle combined with the democratic. Now let me summarize this picture once more. Here we have, in fact, I want to do it historically, because this opposition between lawless and lawful government, between despotic government and republican government, was a revolution that took place in the ancient world and went on taking place right down to the 18th century. The French Revolution was this kind of revolution, this against this, or revolution against this for this kind of government. Our own American Revolution was this kind of revolution. The 18th century revolutions were republican revolutions, revolutions for liberty, primarily for liberty, freedom from despotic rule. But the 19th century revolution, in this country and abroad, and mainly in this country and England, beginning with Jackson, running through the Civil War, coming right down into our own day, is with a revolution that takes place within republican government, between those who want government in the hands of the few, the rich, the property owners, the noble classes, and those who want government in the hands of all men. The whole population to be treated as the people. All men shall be granted suffrage. Democracy is distinguished from aristocracy or oligarchy by the principle of justice, which is universal suffrage. And this 19th century revolution of democracy against oligarchy has gone on in our own day in the 20th century. Only it has broadened out even further. In the 20th century, we have proceeded not only to fight for political rights, but for social and economic rights. Where in the 19th century, men were concerned only with political justice, in the 20th they want economic and social justice. And the fight in our own day for civil rights is a fight for the democratic principle of equal political, social, and economic opportunity for all men. And when that fight is won, I think we shall have the best form of government that man can ever have on earth.
Dr. Adler?
Yes, Lloyd?
Your distinction between Republican and Democratic in these remarks about revolution caused me to interrupt you for these two excellent questions. The first one from Richard Johnson of San Francisco. He says, now at what point do the people who are the source of the government's authority have the right to attempt to overthrow that government? And is the only justification for such an attempt the denial by the government of the natural rights of man? So when can you revolt?
Well, the revolution is going on all the time, as a matter of fact, and it's going on in a variety of ways. Let me go back to the Declaration of Independence on this question, because the Declaration gives us an answer to the question, Lloyd. The Declaration says, recall, whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, the one Mr. Johnson mentions, the natural rights of men, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Now notice, the Declaration says they have a right to alter or abolish it. And when a government, Lloyd, doesn't give the people any due process of law to alter or amend the government, they can do nothing but overthrow it. The wonderful thing about our form of constitutional government, I think, is it provides due process of law for the gradual improvement, alteration, or amendment of our Constitution and our form of government. In fact, these revolutions that have been going on since we won the first revolution against Great Britain have, for the most part, with the one exception of the Civil War and the Civil War amendments, been bloodless revolutions. Revolutions by legal or constitutional change, the use of due process of law to carry the social, political, and economic revolution forward. And as long as we have that in the United States, there's never any need for bloody revolution.
Now, the next question follows, though, I think quite hard on that explanation. Donald Brandon of San Francisco asks, in the United States, government by the people means in practice the government by one of the two major political parties. Now, what can the citizen do to further the purpose of government when in the service of the common good, when both parties are partial to particular interests rather than servicing the interests of all the people?
Well, I once agreed with Mr. Brandon that parties cannot serve the common good. I've changed my mind since then. If Mr. Brandon would like a copy of an article I wrote on parties and the common good, if he'll write me, I'll send it to him. In addition, I think the parties themselves have changed in the history of our country. At one time, one of the two parties, the Republican Party, was for the few, and the Democratic Party was for the masses, or at least whatever parties were that took on those names. At one time, the parties were opposed on the principle of democracy itself. But now that the democratic revolution has taken place, the two parties are both democratic parties, really, and they only differ on the ways and means to bring about the best forms of the best state of democratic government. They differ only about the rate of change, and that, I think, is a great blessing under which we live. Now, next week, we're going to discuss labor and the related ideas of rest and sleep and play and leisure. If you have any questions about any of these ideas, please write in a question about them, which we'll try to answer next week. And for Mr. Luckman and myself, I would like to say to all of you a very happy New Year.